So do you want to grow a garden that's easier on your back, your wallet, and your plants? But is that really too good to be true? I'm going to give you 4 pros and 4 cons of raised bed gardening, because before you build, you're going to want to know what you're getting into. Stay tuned to find out whether this gardening trend is really worth all the hype. All right, let's start with the number 1 benefit, and that is complete control over your soil. When I talk about better control over your soil in your raised bed gardening, what I'm really referring to is the ability to manage, customize, and maintain your soil conditions. And you can maintain them more effectively than in a traditional in-ground garden. So unlike traditional in-ground beds where you're stuck with whatever soil that nature gives you, raised beds are going to let you start fresh. You can mix in like compost, organic matter, worm castings, whatever your plants love. So now this is especially helpful when your native soil is a heavy clay, or it's full of rocks, or even extremely sandy, or maybe even contaminated. You can eliminate all the guesswork and tailor your mix to a specific crop, like maybe some root veggies or even your leafy greens. The number 2 con for raised bed gardens is going to improve drainage. Raised beds offer excellent draining, which is very critical to prevent root rot and other water-related issues. And we've got like close to 9 inches of rain in just 2 days, and as you can see, we've got more on the way. This is a huge win for people like me with compacted, waterlogged soil, because you're filling the bed with your own soil. You can ensure that it's light and it drains well, especially when compared to this dense compacted clay soil that's common in most yards. So the better drainage reduces the risk of root rot and a lot of other fungal issues. It's also easier to amend if you notice say that soil is a little bit soggy or even too dry. Over the seasons, raised beds make it easier to amend and replenish the soil. Since the soil is confined to a smaller area, you're not going to have to treat large areas like this, and spend a whole lot of money over the whole garden when you can just amend the soil right where the plants are going to be needing it. And another plus is because you don't walk on the soil in a raised bed, that structure is going to remain loosened and aerated, which helps your roots grow deeper and absorb better nutrients. So this is especially helpful for your root vegetables and plants that like that fluffy substrate. Number 3 pro for raised beds, and one of the most satisfying benefits in my eyes, would be fewer weeds and fewer pests. Fresh soil equals fewer weed seeds. When you build a raised bed, you're often adding fresh, weed-free soil. This gives you a clean slate, significantly reducing the number of weed seeds compared, if you can see in the background here, existing ground soil. You are defining your boundaries. Less weeds creep in from the surrounding areas because your wooden, metal, or stone walls of this raised bed act like a physical barrier. This is going to help prevent grass and weeds from creeping in from your paths or your lawns. And if you decide that you're going to go with mulch, straw, or wood chips, or some type of landscaping fabric, it's more effective in raised beds that have borders. So the physical barriers also make it easier to implement and add stuff like, roll covers or insect netting. You can, even cold frames, or even make little mini greenhouses over the top of this, and even fencing to deter rabbits and deer. And around here, we have so many deer that like to come in and stick their nose in my garden and eat my stuff. And I don't like that. And with raised beds, you're going to improve the drainage. That means, pests, especially like fungal gnats or root maggots, some soil-borne pathogens will actually thrive in overly wet, compacted soil. So raised beds are better at creating a less hospitable environment for those type of pests. With less soil contact, when the leaves and the fruits are elevated off the ground, they are less likely to be attacked by crawling pests like slugs, cutworms, or even pill bugs. And for those of you who struggle with pests like voles, moles, and wireworms that live inside this ground, and they can actually wreak havoc on in-ground gardens. You can line the bottom of these raised beds with either like hardware cloth or mesh or some type of chicken wire, anything like that, and you can actually block them from actually getting in. Alright, now let's talk about ergonomics for the number 4 Pro, and that is less strain on your body. Raised beds are a lifesaver on your back and your knees. So with traditional in-ground gardening, often requires deep bending or kneeling that, to reach your plants. And that can put a heck of a strain on your lower back, your hips, or knees over time. Raised beds, especially those anywhere from 18 to 36 inches high, that's going to bring the soil surface closer to the gardener, minimizing how far you need to reach down. That's just some of the benefits that's going to ease pressure on your lumbar spine and reduce that back pain. And that's definitely going to help those people with arthritis or joint pain in the knees and hips. And it helps us older gardeners or those with limited mobility and they want to maintain their independence in gardening. You can even have the opportunity to sit while gardening. Raised beds can be designed with a wide edge or even a built-in bench, allowing gardeners to sit comfortably on a stool or even on the edge of the bed while working. Some of these benefits prevent prolonged squatting and kneeling, making it very easy to spend more time in the garden. And you can spend more time in the garden, and it encourages a mindful, meditative gardening rather than a hurried, uncomfortable session just trying to get through that gardening session. Raised beds are using that loose, amended soil that doesn't compact easily as that native ground soil. So this is going to reduce the need for like heavy digging, tilling, or using shovels that actually put stress on your wrist, your shoulders, your back, and this is also going to minimize repetitive strain injuries, and it's more accessible for weeding and planting with, hand tools and making it easier to maintain all around. Okay, now that I've told you the 4 pros to raised beds, now I'm going to go over the 4 cons. When considering raised beds, one of the key factors that people often weigh in on the most, and that is the cost. Raised beds are popular because they offer better soil control, improved drainage, and reduce the need for bending while gardening. However, the cost associated with setting up and maintaining raised beds, sometimes that cost is going to be higher than your traditional in-ground gardening. So let me break it down a little bit on some of the gardening cost for a raised bed. The cost of material for the frame itself can vary widely depending on what you choose to build it with wood being the most common choice, but a higher quality rot-resistant wood like cedar or redwood, that can be extremely expensive. A single 2x4 board of cedar, for instance, might cost you between $7 to $14 depending on where you live, and a large raised bed, that's going to take several of these boards, pushing the cost way up extremely quick. Now, if you go with like composite wood or metal, oh shoot, that can be even way more expensive. Now, if you don't already own the tools needed to build the frame, like a saw, a drill, screws, miter saw, anything like that, you're going to need to purchase them or rent them. And this is going to add more significant amount to the total cost of the project. The next cost that you're going to have to worry about is the soil for the raised beds. Unlike in-ground gardening, where you're often using native soil, raised beds are going to require a high quality soil. This is particularly true if you're trying to grow vegetables or flowers that need to grow in that good, loose soil. So filling the beds with quality soil can also run you a pretty penny, and it can be really expensive, especially if those beds are really large. The cost will depend on the number of cubic yards of the soil that you need. But, you know, that range can be anywhere between $25 to $100 per cubic yard for good quality soil, or a blend of topsoil, compost, or even organic matter. You want to keep that in mind when you're building these garden beds. All right, the number 2 con for a raised bed garden that can be significant downside is they tend to dry out really fast, and a lot faster than your traditional in-ground gardens. I keep pointing behind me because I forgot I moved. This is not my garden. This issue is going to present several challenges for gardeners, especially climates where water conservation is a concern or in really hot or dry areas. Let's talk about the increased air exposure and sun exposure. Raised beds are elevated above the ground, so this means that your soil is more exposed to the surrounding air and the sunlight. And we have a lot of air blowing today. So stuff like this is going to really drive that moisture out of that soil. While this can provide advantages in terms of drainage and root aeration, it also accelerates the rate of evaporation. So the soil in your raised bed tends to dry out faster than the soil like at ground level, because it has a greater surface area exposed to the elements. Raised beds have a lack of ground moisture. Now, traditional garden beds benefit from the moisture content in the surrounding earth. The ground beneath the garden bed acts as a natural reservoir, helping retain moisture into the soil, which is the problem that we have in our raised bed, or our ground bed, is the fact that we can't get all that moisture out of the soil. So raised beds, however, they don't have access to that buffer zone of the moisture. So as a result, any added water to the bed drains more quickly, leading to faster soil drying. And finally, raised beds have temperature fluctuations. And what do I mean by that? I mean raised beds will actually heat up and cool down more rapidly than your in-ground or level beds. This can be an issue in areas where the daytime temperatures are much higher than the nighttime temperatures. So the soil in raised beds can actually heat up too quickly during the day, and that's going to accelerate that evaporation process. And at night, the soil cools down way more quickly, and that can lead to inconsistent moisture levels, which is making it very difficult to keep your soil evenly moist. The number 3 con of a raised bed garden, and one of the most obvious and impactful disadvantages, is the limited space for root development. As the roots are more confined to a smaller area than in a traditional in-ground where it has ample amount of room to grow, with this limited root space, it can actually lead to various issues that may not be immediately apparent. While raised beds may actually provide excellent drainage and soil aeration, the limited depth and width of a bed restrict the growth of the actual plant roots. Some of the problems that you might actually have occur is stunted plant growth. Many of the plants, like larger ones like these tomatoes, they have deep, expensive root systems that need ample space in order to spread out. In a shallow, raised bed, the roots can actually quickly hit the edge of the bed and become kind of entangled up. This limits their ability to be able to absorb the nutrients and the water efficiently, and potentially stunning their growth overall. Also, you may have some root competition with these small beds. Like, plants are more than likely going to try to compete for that space. When root systems are crowded, plants are going to suffer from nutrient and water deficiencies. The root competition can also reduce the overall health of each plant, resulting in lower yields and a weaker garden overall. Nutrient intake is also impacted by a limited root space. In raised bed gardening, nutrients may actually become depleted faster, particularly in your smaller raised beds or your potted plants and stuff like that. They are really going to go through the nutrients very quick. Since the plant root systems are confined to a limited area, they can quickly use up the available nutrients in that space, meaning you're going to have to use more fertilizer or more compost, which again goes to that it's going to cost more money. And finally, the number 4 con for raised bed gardening, that would be what we talked about a little bit earlier, and that's temperature fluctuations. Because the raised beds are elevated above the ground, they warm up quickly in the spring and they can cool down faster in the fall. I did mention earlier that it was also a pro to be able to start your raised bed garden earlier in the spring, but it's also a con because as those summer months roll in, that gives it the opposite effect. This is especially problematic if the bed is small or even shallow. Shallow roots are more susceptible to extreme temperature changes. And in hot weather, the soil in a raised bed can become excessively warm, potentially damaging a lot of the roots. On the other hand, the cooler months, the soil can actually cool down too quickly, hindering root growth and slowing the plant's development, especially on your peppers and your tomatoes, cucumbers, stuff like that that really need those warm temperatures. You can always add like a layer of mulch that can help with this, but once again, that's more work and more cost. So the main time that you're going to really worry about these temperature fluctuations, it's going to recur in the early spring or late fall. The soil may actually warm up earlier than the ground beneath it, and that's going to allow an earlier start for planting. But, however, if the temperature drops suddenly, it can actually affect the seedlings that you are trying to establish and really hinder that root system. And you really need a established, good root system in order for these plants to thrive through these hot summertime months. All right. So, what's the verdict? Well, the verdict is raised bed gardening offers a unique blend of benefits and it offers a unique blend of challenges that every gardener is going to have to consider before committing to this. The advantages, such as improved quality of soil, better drainage, and easier access, that can make gardening more enjoyable and more productive, particularly for those with limited space or physical restraints. However, it is important to weigh these positives against the potential downsides, like the initial cost, the need for ongoing maintenance, and the possibility of those extreme temperature fluctuations. Ultimately, whether raised beds are actually right for you depends on your individual gardening goals and available resources and the willingness to manage that upkeep. By carefully considering both the pros and the cons, you can make an informed decision that tailor to your gardening approach and suit your needs and your environment. My advice is to start with one bed and then scale up. See if it's worth the cost and the maintenance for you to pursue more and more of the raised beds. Let me know down in the comments whether you use raised beds or what your experience has been like with them. Let me know in the comments too if you prefer raised bed over in-ground bed. Don't forget to like this video, think about subscribing to the channel, and hit that bell notification and I'll let you know the next time I put a video out. And like always, keep it growing.